"Please do not come back tonight, or any night," my mother's cruel note read, leaving me freezing on the streets with just a canvas duffel and a $10 bill. My cold stepfather thought he had successfully discarded a worthless 20-year-old orphan when he locked me out of my childhood home. He was absolutely certain I would fade away into nothingness on a bus station bench. He had no idea those final $10 had just purchased a condemned 1958 train depot. And as my trembling hands used an iron lever to pry open deliberately concealed floorboards in the old ticket booth, he certainly didn't know I was about to unearth a hidden lockbox packed with thousands in vintage cash and a silver legacy that would rebuild my entire world. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Wynne Halloran came from a family that had worked the railroads of eastern Pennsylvania for as long as the railroads had been there to work. Her grandfather, Padraig Halloran, had been a brakeman on the Pennsylvania Railroad's Pocono Division from 1949 until the line went bankrupt in 1976, and then for Conrail until he retired in 1981. He had grown up the youngest of 7 children in a coal patch house in Lackawanna County, and had quit school at 15 to take a job on the section gang because his father had died of black lung and the family had needed the wages. He had ridden the cabooses of freight trains through every kind of Pennsylvania weather for 32 years. He had a flat-topped silver pocket watch on a worn leather cord that he had carried in the breast pocket of his denim work shirt every day of his working life, set to railroad time, accurate to within 10 seconds a year. Wynne's father, Sean Halloran, had grown up listening to his father's stories at the kitchen table in the small Scranton row house where the family lived. He had told everyone he was going to do something different with his life, something that did not involve diesel fuel and frostbitten hands, and for 2 years after high school, he had worked in an insurance office in downtown Scranton, wearing a tie. Then, on a Monday morning in 1998, he had walked into the office, set his nameplate on his desk, walked back out, and applied for a job on the Conrail track maintenance crew. He told Padraig that night that the office had felt like wearing somebody else's coat. Padraig had nodded and slid the silver pocket watch across the kitchen table and told his son to keep it on him because a railroad man should always know what time it is. Sean Halloran married a woman named Mary Doherty in the spring of 2000, and Wynne was born the following autumn. For the first 12 years of Wynne's life, her father came home every evening with grease on his hands and the sweet diesel smell of the rail yards in his hair. He taught her how the switches worked. He taught her the names of the different kinds of freight cars, box cars and gondolas and hoppers and tank cars and reefers. He taught her how to read a schedule. He taught her that a railroad was the most honest kind of work there was, because steel does not lie, and gravity does not lie, and a train will arrive at a place at a particular time, or it will not, and there is nothing else to discuss. He died in March of Wynne's 12th year, a freight derailment on a cold morning in the cut north of Pittston. The Conrail incident report said the cause was a broken rail in a frozen tie plate. Sean had been on the ground crew responding to the derailment when a second car shifted off the rails above him. Padraig outlived his son by 14 months and then died on a Sunday morning in his armchair in the row house, the silver pocket watch open on the table beside him. Wynne was the only family left to inherit it. She put it on a leather cord around her neck the day after Padraig's funeral, and she had worn it every day since. Her mother, Mary, did not handle the loss well. She had loved Sean with the kind of total devotion that some women bring to a single man in their lives. And when he was gone, she could not find a way to continue without him. For the first year, she barely left the house. In the second year, she met a man at a grief support group named Brendan Corley, and within 6 months she had married him. And within 12 months, Brendan had moved into the row house, and Wynne had begun to understand that she was no longer welcome in the only home she had ever known. Brendan was not violent. He was simply cold, the kind of cold that fills a room slowly until there is no warm corner left. And Mary had stopped defending Wynne against him by the time Wynne was 16. Wynne got a job at 16 at a small diner near the old DL&W rail yards in Scranton, a place called Vera's, run by a Polish-American woman in her early 60s named Vera Kosciuszko. Vera had been widowed twice, once by a steel worker and once by a yard switchman, and she ran the diner the way she ran her own life, with strong coffee and few wasted words and an unspoken understanding that the people who came through her door were carrying things they did not always want to talk about. She hired Wynne for the busser shift on a Tuesday afternoon and never asked a personal question for the first 6 months. By the time she finally asked one, Wynne was ready to answer it, and the answering took nearly 4 hours and a whole pot of coffee and the kind of patient listening that is harder to find than gold. Vera knew Padraig's name when Wynne mentioned him. She had served him eggs every Saturday morning for 19 years before he retired. She knew Sean, too. She had brought a casserole to the wake. When she put these pieces together, she looked at Wynne across the Formica table in the back booth and said, "Then this booth is yours whenever you need it. You hear me, Halloran girl?" Wynne had heard her. She finished high school living mostly out of her duffel bag. Some nights at home in the row house. Some nights on the back bench in the diner kitchen after Vera had locked up. Some nights at a friend's apartment when the friend's parents weren't paying attention. She graduated in June and turned 18 the same week and got a second job at a diner on Wyoming Avenue and tried to save what she could. The pocket watch ticked against her collarbone every day. She thought of it as her grandfather still walking the line beside her. In February of her 20th year, she came home from a closing shift at the diner to find a cardboard box on the front porch of the row house. Inside the box were her clothes, her textbooks, the photograph of her father in his Conrail jacket, and a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her father's mother. On top of the box, set carefully in the center, was the silver pocket watch, which meant that her stepfather had gone into her room and taken it from her dresser drawer where she kept it on the night she did not wear it, and put it on top of the box so she could not pretend she had been forgotten. Taped to the front door was a folded sheet of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was her mother. It said, "Wynne, Brendan and I have decided this is the best thing for everyone. You are an adult now. We need our own space. Please do not come back tonight or any night. Please do not call. Mum." Wynne read the note twice. She tried the front door. It was locked. She tried the back door, the side door, the basement door from the alley. Locked. All of them locked. She picked up the cardboard box and hung the silver pocket watch back around her neck on its leather cord, and walked the 11 blocks to Vera's diner in the cold. And she did not cry, because crying was a private weather, and not the right answer to that particular kind of cold. Vera took one look at her face and turned the open sign to closed and made her sit down in the back booth and brought her a plate of eggs and home fries and a mug of coffee. She did not ask any questions until Wynne had eaten. Then she asked one. Wynne told her. Vera nodded once and said, "You stay with me until you figure out what comes next. I've got a spare room above the diner that's been empty since my second husband died. It's yours." Wynne lived in that small upstairs room above Vera's diner for 2 months. Vera refused to let her pay rent. She said the rent was Wynne working the morning shift, Tuesday through Saturday, which Wynne would have done for free anyway. Vera fed her 3 meals a day. She washed Wynne's clothes in the small machine in the diner basement. She left a fresh bar of lavender soap on the bathroom shelf every Sunday, because Wynne had once mentioned in passing that her grandmother had used lavender soap. It was the kindest 2 months of Wynne's life. But Wynne knew she could not stay forever. Vera was nearly 62, and the diner was getting harder for her to run alone, and Wynne did not want to become a person who needed somebody else to carry her. She started looking for a place of her own. An apartment in Scranton was out of the question on diner wages. She looked at rooms for rent in the rougher neighborhoods and could not bring herself to take any of them. Then one evening at the back booth with a cup of coffee in the diner's old laptop that Vera had set up for the customers to use, she typed cheapest property, Pennsylvania, into a search engine just to see what came up. The 5th result was a county surplus auction page from a place called Penn Forest Township in the Allegheny foothills north of Bedford. The page listed 11 abandoned buildings being sold for nominal fees ahead of a planned demolition. A Grange Hall, a 1-room schoolhouse, a creamery, a blacksmith shop, a dance pavilion, and near the bottom of the list, a building described as former Penn Central / PRR, Branch Line Depot, Whitlock Junction, abandoned 1958, scheduled for demolition spring of next year. The price was $10. Wynne sat very still and read the listing 3 times. A train depot. She showed the listing to Vera the next morning. Vera read it carefully through her reading glasses, looked up at Wynne and said, "Halloran girl, that's the line your grandfather rode in 1953 and 1954 when he was on temporary assignment to the Bedford branch. He used to tell me about Whitlock Junction. He said the station agent there made the best coffee on the division." Vera paused. "He also said it was the loneliest stop on the line. He said you could stand on the platform at midnight and hear the river. But not a single other thing." Wynne touched the pocket watch through the front of her sweater. "Vera, I think I'm going to go look at it." "I think you are too, pet. Take the bus. I'll write you down for 2 days off." The bus from Scranton to Bedford took most of a day with 2 transfers. The final leg was a county shuttle that ran twice a week and dropped her at a crossroads 4 miles from the township office in a part of the Allegheny foothills where the road wound through narrow valleys of bare winter hardwood and the air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. She walked the 4 miles. The pocket watch ticked against her collarbone the whole way. The Penn Forest Township office was a small frame building beside a closed general store on a single main street with 7 other buildings on it. Inside, a woman in her 50s named Dorothea Kratzer sat behind a counter with a mug of tea and a stack of property records. Dorothea had been the township clerk for 19 years. "You hear about the depot?" Dorothea said. "Yes, ma'am. You know it's been closed since '58. The roof over the freight room is half gone. The track was pulled up in '61. There's no power and no water. The county is going to take it down in March." "Yes, ma'am. I have $10. Dorothea looked at her for a long moment. Then she pulled a deed book from a shelf behind her and turned to a page that had been waiting for years. Sign here and here and here. Wynne signed Wynne Mary Halloran in the careful slanted hand her grandfather had taught her. Dorothea took the $10 bill, folded it once, tucked it into a metal cash box, and stamped the deed with a brass stamp that made a soft, flat sound. It's yours. It's 1.5 miles down the old rail bed if you walk it. You want a ride? My husband's got the truck out front. The depot stood in a clearing where the rail bed widened into what had once been the Whitlock Junction passing siding. It was a single-story building of dark red board and batten siding faded to the color of dried clay, with a wide, overhanging eave that ran the length of the platform side, a peaked shingle roof with a small bay window projecting toward where the tracks had once been, and a tall brick chimney rising from the back wall. The bay window was the ticket office where the station agent had once watched for incoming trains. The waiting room door was on the right, the freight room on the left. Above the bay window, painted in faded white letters on a dark green board, was the original sign, Whitlock JCT Pen RR. The platform was still there, made of weathered boards greened with moss. The rail bed beyond it was a long, straight scar in the woods, where the tis and the rails had been pulled up 60 years ago, the ballast still showing in patches where the leaves had not yet covered it. Dorothea unlocked the padlock on the waiting room door and handed Wynne the key. There's a bench inside that'll do for sleeping if you've got a sleeping bag. I'll come back in 2 days. She drove away in the green pickup, and Wynne was alone in the clearing with the depot, and the silence and the long, empty rail bed running away into the trees. She stepped inside. The waiting room was a single long room, with a slate floor scuffed soft by 60 years of feet, dark wainscoted walls, a wooden bench running along one wall, a black pot-bellied stove in the corner, and at the far end of the room, the closed wooden door of the ticket booth set into the wall beneath the bay window. The air smelled like cold cinder and old paper, and the faint, sweet smell of pine boards. Wynne walked the length of the room slowly. She put her hand on the cold iron of the pot-bellied stove. She put her hand on the wooden bench. She put her hand on the closed door of the ticket booth and turned the brass knob. The door swung open into the small ticket booth itself, maybe 6 feet square. A high wooden agent's desk faced the bay window. A tall wooden stool stood behind the desk. A row of pigeonholes was built into the wall above the desk for waybills and receipts. A small iron safe with a combination dial sat on the floor in the corner. A chalkboard was mounted to the wall for writing arrival and departure times. The last entry still ghosted in faint white chalk. 6:42 p.m. eastbound, final. Wynne sat down on the wooden stool behind the desk and looked out through the bay window at the empty rail bed. And she thought about her grandfather, who had sat on a stool exactly like this one in a depot. Exactly like this one when he was younger than she was now. And she thought about the silver pocket watch around her neck, which had been kept on railroad time for 50 years, by a man who would have understood exactly why she had walked 4 miles in the cold to sit on this stool. She slid off the stool to look at the floor underneath it. The floorboards in the ticket booth were old pine, the same as the rest of the building, but the boards directly beneath the stool were a slightly different color than the surrounding boards. Darker, as if they had been replaced at some point and had aged differently. Wynne knelt down and ran her fingertips along the seam where the darker boards met the lighter ones. She felt a gap, a deliberate gap, smooth cut, the kind of gap that does not happen by accident. She went back out to the freight room and found a piece of flat iron that might once have been part of a switch lever, and she came back and used it to pry up the edge of the dark boards. They came up together in a small section about 18 inches square, hinged on a single pair of leather hinges that had hardened with age, but had not broken. Underneath was a small wooden compartment fitted into the floor joists. Inside the compartment, lying on a piece of old oilcloth, was a tin lock box and a sealed envelope and a folded American flag. Wynne lifted them out one at a time. The tin lock box was heavy, the kind of small fireproof box a station agent might have used to keep the day's cash before the night train. The envelope was thick paper, the ink on the front faded brown, addressed in a careful slanted hand, "To whoever finds this." The flag was a small 48-star flag, neatly folded in the triangular military fold, dating it to before 1959. She opened the lockbox first. Inside, in neat rows, were bundled banknotes, old-style United States currency from the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, 20s and 50s, and a small stack of hundreds held together with paper bands that crumbled at the edges when she touched them. She counted slowly. The total was $9,320. Beneath the bills was a small leather pouch. Inside the pouch were 11 silver dollars, each one wrapped in tissue paper, and a railroad pocket watch, a Hamilton 992B in a silver hunting case, the standard timepiece of every Pennsylvania railroad agent and conductor, identical in make and model to the one that had hung around her grandfather's neck for 32 years. She set the pouch carefully aside and opened the envelope. The letter was written on heavy cream paper, the ink brown with age, but the handwriting clear and careful, the hand of a man who had spent his life filling out waybills and timetables in a small, neat slant. "To whoever finds this, my name is Harlan Bowyer. I have been the station agent at Whitlock Junction on the Bedford branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad from 1932 until today, the 17th of June, 1958. The branch line is being closed at the end of this week. The last passenger train will run on Friday evening. After that, the rails will be pulled and the building will be locked, and there will be no reason for anyone to come here again. I am 64 years old, and I have no children. My wife Eleanor passed in the influenza spring of 1949. I have spent my at this small junction watching trains come in from Bedford in the morning and go out toward Pittsburgh at night. And I have known every regular passenger by name. And I have made a pot of coffee every morning at 5 o'clock for the brakeman on the through freights, even though it was not part of my duties. I considered it my duty anyway. Coffee is a small kindness, and a small kindness on a cold morning is sometimes the difference between a good day and a hard one. I have saved a portion of every paycheck I ever drew in this lockbox beneath the floor of the booth where I have sat for 26 years. I do not trust banks. I lost what little I had in the failure of the Bedford Trust in 1933, and I have nowhere else to put what I have saved. The silver dollars are from Eleanor's family. The Hamilton watch was issued to me by the railroad in 1934, and I'm leaving it behind because I do not want to carry railroad time after Friday. If you are reading this letter, you came into this depot after I am gone. Maybe long after. Maybe the building has been forgotten. Maybe you came looking for shelter, or quiet, or a place to begin again. Whatever brought you here, I want you to know that the depot has been waiting for you. A small station is a kind of patient thing. It waits for the train, and then it waits for the next train, and then eventually, when there are no more trains, it waits for whoever will come next. I have been the one waiting at Whitlock Junction since 1932. I am leaving the waiting to you now. Take what is in this box. It is for you. The flag is from Eleanor's brother, who was a brakeman on the Erie and was killed in a coupling accident in 1944. Keep it folded the way I have folded it. Be kind to the building. The coffee tastes better here than anywhere on the division. I do not know why, and I have stopped trying to find out. Harlan Boyer, Station Agent, Whitlock Junction, June 17th, 1958. Wynne read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully along its old creases and placed it back in its envelope, and sat very still on the floor of the ticket booth with the bank notes and the silver dollars and the Hamilton pocket watch in her lap, and the small folded flag beside her. She did not cry. Her grandfather had not been a man who cried, and she had inherited his hands and his watch, and also his particular kind of restraint. But she said aloud to the empty depot, and to whoever might be listening, "Thank you, Mr. Boyer. I will try." If you're enjoying this story, take a second and subscribe. It helps us keep making stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, what is the smallest kindness someone has ever shown you on a cold morning? The rebuilding took patient months. Wynne spent the first week walking the depot in daylight and making a list in a small pocket notebook of everything that needed doing. The roof over the freight room had to be reframed and reshingled before the spring rains. The bay window had to be reglazed. The pot-bellied stove needed its flue cleaned. The well behind the depot, when Dorothea brought a county inspector out, proved to be sound. And with a new hand pump, it gave cold, clean water that tasted faintly of iron and stone. She did not spend Harlan Boyer's money recklessly. She kept most of it in a lockbox at a credit union in Bedford and spent it in small, careful amounts. A bundle of cedar shingles, a bucket of roofing tar, a second-hand kerosene cook stove, a proper mattress, a wool blanket, 2 pairs of work gloves, a claw hammer, and a hand saw, and a box of galvanized nails. She learned to shingle a roof by watching a video on the library computer in Bedford, and by making mistakes and correcting them. She learned to hang a new door by asking an old man at the diner in town, a retired carpenter named Augie Klein, who came out one Saturday with his own tools and showed her how to set the hinges. The people of Penn Forest Township began to notice her. Dorothea came by every Wednesday with a thermos of coffee and the township newsletter. Augie Klein came back twice more on Saturdays to help with the bay window and refused to let her pay him. A retired Conrail engineer named Marcus Linwood, who lived 4 miles away in a small cabin and had heard from Dorothea that a young woman was reopening the Whitlock depot, drove out one afternoon in his old Ford pickup with a wooden crate of railroad memorabilia he had been keeping in his attic for 40 years. Old timetables, a brass conductor's lantern, a Pennsylvania Railroad porcelain mug, a section of original rail with the date 1928 stamped into the web. He set the crate on the platform and said, "These belong here more than they belong with me." He came back every other Sunday for the rest of the year, just to drink coffee on the bench and talk about the old line. Vera Kosciuszko drove down from Scranton in the 2nd month with a carload of things from Wynne's room above the diner, including a small framed photograph of Sean Halloran in his Conrail jacket that Wynne had not been able to bring herself to look at since the funeral. Vera stayed for 3 days. She slept on a folding cot Wynne had set up in the freight room. She helped Wynne paint the inside of the ticket booth a soft cream color that made the small space feel twice as big. On the morning she left, she stood beside her car in the clearing and said, "Patrick would be proud. Sean would be proud. You're a Halloran in the only way that matters." And she drove back to Scranton, and Wynne sat on the platform bench for a long time afterward, and finally let herself cry for the first time since the cold February evening when she had read the note on the door. By April, the freight room roof was tight. By May, the bay window held new glass. By June, the pot-bellied stove was cleaned and working, and the waiting room had a swept slate floor and a fresh coat of paint and a row of curtains Dorothea had sewn for the bay window. Wynne made a small bedroom for herself in the freight room with the iron cot and the wool blanket, and she set the framed photograph of her father on the shelf above the cot, along with her grandfather's silver pocket watch on its leather cord. The Hamilton 992B from Harlan Boyer's lockbox she kept on the agent's desk in the ticket booth, wound and set to railroad time, the way Harlan would have kept it. She started serving coffee. It was not a business at first. It was just a thing she did, the way Harlan had done it for the brakeman on the through freights, even though it was not part of his duties. She kept a kettle hot on the pot-bellied stove and a stack of mismatched mugs on the bay window shelf. And any walker who came down the old railbed, and there were more than she expected, hikers and birders and railroad history enthusiasts and the occasional lost backpacker, could come into the waiting room and have a cup. She did not charge. People left small things instead. A jar of honey, a loaf of bread, a handful of wildflowers, a folded $5 bill in a tin she had set on the bench. By autumn, the depot had become something it had not been in over 60 years, which was a place where people stopped on purpose. Marcus Linwood brought her a hand-painted wooden sign for the platform that said, "Whitlock J.C.T. Coffee." Dorothea brought a string of small white lights to hang along the eaves for the winter evenings. Augie Klein built her a new bench for the platform out of reclaimed white oak from a barn in the next valley. On a clear evening in late October, Wynne sat on Augie's new bench with her grandfather's pocket watch in one hand and Harlan Boyer's Hamilton in the other, and watched the sun go down over the bare ridge of the foothills. Both watches read exactly the same time, accurate to the second, set to railroad time, the way they had been carried by men who had spent their lives believing that knowing the time was a kind of duty to the people who depended on you to be where you said you would be, when you said you would be there. She thought about her grandfather, Patrick, who had ridden cabooses through every kind of Pennsylvania weather for 32 years and had never once been late to work. She thought about her father, Sean, who had walked out of an insurance office because the coat had felt like somebody else's and had gone back to the only kind of work that had ever felt like his. She thought about Harlan Boyer, who had served coffee at 5 o'clock every morning to brakemen he was not required to serve, and had hidden a lockbox under the floor of his ticket booth on his last day at the junction in 1958, because he had believed that small kindness was a kind of patience, and that patience always finds the person it has been waiting for. And she thought about her mother, Mary, who had taped a note to a door, because she could not stand to look at the daughter who reminded her of the husband she had lost. Wynne understood now that her mother had not meant to push her toward a new life. Her mother had only meant to make her own grief a little quieter. But sometimes the doors other people close are the doors that turn us toward the doors that have been waiting for us. And sometimes A cold February evening on a cold front porch is the same thing as the long, slow whistle of a train coming in from Bedford at 6:42 in the evening, calling you toward the place you did not know you were going. That's the thing about small stations. A small station does not stop being a station just because the trains have stopped coming. It keeps the schedule in its bones. It keeps the coffee in its kettle. It keeps the lockbox under the floor of the booth, and the flag folded in its triangular fold, and the silver pocket watch wound on the desk. All the small honest things that the last person who loved the building set down before they turned the key in the door. A small station waits. It has always waited. That is what a station is. And when the next person finally walks down the rail bed in the cold, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, and $10 and a watch on a leather cord, the station does not need to speak, because stations do not speak. It only needs to show her the loose floorboards beneath the stool. Harlan Bowyer had waited for Wynne Halloran for 65 years without knowing her name. Patrick had waited for her in the shape of a flat-topped silver pocket watch on a leather cord. Sean had waited for her in the smell of diesel and the names of freight cars she could still recite by heart. Vera Kosciuszko had waited for her in the back booth of a diner in Scranton with a fresh pot of coffee and an unspoken understanding. Dorothea Kratzer and Augie Klein and Marcus Linwood had been waiting for her too, each in their own quiet Pennsylvania way, for the young woman who would walk 4 miles down a county road in the cold and sign her name in her grandfather's slanted hand. Wynne Halloran was 20 years old and homeless. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it on an abandoned train depot in the Allegheny foothills of central Pennsylvania. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you loved it, we have something special for you. 12 brand new stories never released on YouTube, only available to the people who support this channel directly. Each one a full quiet road story, just like this one. You will find the link in the bio. We poured our whole hearts into these, and we made them for the people who truly listen. Thank you for being one of them. See you on the next quiet road.